For those who haven't been here before or met me before, I'm William Fieldhouse, the Inspector appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. A reminder, please, if everyone could switch their mobile phones and laptops, etc., to silent. No fire alarm tests are planned for this afternoon, so if the alarm does go, we will need to evacuate the building through the doors at this end or here, following the green emergency exit signs. So this afternoon, we've got Matters 12, which deals with a number of policies in the plan, some of which we've talked about before, or certain parts of them before, but it's just an opportunity to pick up from a different perspective, potentially, some of those policies. And then after Matter 12, we've got Matter 13, which is a number of other issues, mainly to do with the Council's responses to some action points that I had published earlier during this examination since the hearing session started, and they're set out on the agenda, so hopefully you've got the agenda. We've got until 5 o'clock if we need it. I doubt we will need that long. What we'll do, we'll have a short adjournment after Matter 12 to have a break there, and then we'll move on to Matter 13. As is normal, I'll usually start with some questions to the Council on a particular issue, and then when I've finished going through those, I'll invite contributions from others. If you do wish to speak on a particular issue, if you could put your nameplate vertically, and I'll ask you to speak at an appropriate time. And if you could make sure there's a microphone, you're sharing microphones, but if you could make sure it's close enough and at an appropriate height and angle to pick up your voice. There is a bit more noise around the building or this room today than there has been sometimes. I think there's been a wedding on, so not surprisingly, it's caused a bit of background noise. Okay, I'll go around the table again to let people introduce themselves, and then I'll just check to see if there's any queries before we move on to issue 12.1. So if I could start with the Council, please.
Emmeline Lambert, Council for West Berkshire.
Emily Ashton-Jelly, West Berkshire Council, Environment Delivery Team.
Lila Bassett, West Berkshire Council.
Alec Gore, West Berkshire Council, Transport Policy.
Paul Goddard, West Berkshire Council, Highways.
Shukri Masari, West Berkshire Council.
Suzanne McLaughlin, Environmental Health, West Berkshire Council.
Alex Jones, WSP for West Berkshire Council.
Not working. Carolyn Richardson, Service Manager for Emergency Planning for West Berkshire Council.
Sean Bashford from Quads representing AWE.
Eamon Guilford representing the Office for Nuclear Regulation.
Yes, I'm representing AWE Aldermaster and AWE Burfield Residents Group. Thank you.
Anthony Pick, Chairman of the West Berkshire Heritage Forum.
Simon Pike, for Matter 13, I'm representing personally. For if the need arises for Matter 12, I'll be representing Thatcham Town Council. Thank you.
Good afternoon, James Isles from Provision. I'm here just for Matter 13 this afternoon, but I do notice that my little nameplate has disappeared since this morning. So I don't know if that's an indication I'm not welcome.
You're very welcome. So yes, right. Fine. Maybe when we have a break for Matter 13, we can get your nameplate back.
Right, Paula Saunderson. I am the Secretary of the New Newbury Flood and Drainage Forum. I am the Flood Warden for Newbury Clay Hill Ward, and I'm a member of the Lambourne Valley Flood Forum for the lower reaches from Donington to its confluence with the Kennet.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I was aware of a recent request for you to participate, and I did have a look at you made considerable representations about the plan, so I'm aware of those. I had a look through those. So, as you'll probably gather, it's not an opportunity to go through and recite all that. I'll have some particular questions, and we're looking at some, as if by magic. Look, your nameplate has appeared. Yes, so I'm aware of the points raised, and I will take account of all those points raised. But we are dealing with some particular policies and some particular questions this afternoon. So, okay, right. Let's move. Unless there's any queries or procedural points, no. In which case, let's just move on to some of these other policies. I put the first item on the agenda here which was about policies SP5 and DM4, which are basically about the approach in the plan to tackling climate change. We dealt with those policies last week, I think it was, and particularly in the context of their requirements they set out for residential development. But we also dealt with a lot of the general matters that those policies address, which I don't need to go over again today. We also did actually address the issue of the policy that's more specific to non-residential development, the requirement for BREEAM excellent for commercial development. So I don't really have a great deal more to ask about that policy. It was really an opportunity. I mean, obviously, when I set the agenda, I didn't know who would be making statements and who would be wishing to say more about this. So I don't have any further questions about it. There were some action point. There was an action point and some things to follow up from last week. So that's you know, when I've seen that, I'll give some further thought to that policy and that whole approach. So I don't think there's anyone here who's got a particular who's made any statement or any particular points about these two policies in relation to them generally or in relation to non-residential development. So on that basis, I propose to just move on. If that means certain people from the council wish to leave, feel free to do so. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Rather than we might be doing this into going on to the next one. You might want to move at the same time. In terms of the transport policies, again, I dealt with those. I mean, the only question I had, just to clarify, that there aren't any parking standards in the plan relating to non-residential development. There are references to these guidance documents, but that's because there isn't a particular need to deal with parking standards specific to other non-residential uses.
That is correct. There are no, we do have some standards, but they're very old. But no, I agree. There's no purpose of updating at this stage.
It's dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
Yes, we have been doing that. Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Particularly the fact that sort of changes of employment have become principally permanent over the years. It's difficult to keep up with that.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, I don't have any further questions on that policy. So if your Transport colleagues want to, if anyone else wants to leave, just feel free to. And again, we touched on certain aspects of pollution and air quality in relation to, well, for example, the North East Thatcham site and the ACMA that isn't an ACMA anymore there. So again, we've got policies DM5 and DM8. Just one thing to clarify, actually. There weren't modifications to those policies, I don't think, included in the schedule. I think there was reference at one point to there potentially being some modifications and discussions with the Environment Agency, but have things moved on from that? Basically, there aren't any modifications that the council's proposing.
There was a modification to policy DM5.
There is one. It's
on wastewater and surface water. Second paragraph 10.49.
That isn't in my schedule, is it? Exam, there it is. Exam 23. So where's the modification set out? Just I couldn't quite pick that up. In your statement for matter 12.
Yeah, in the response to the question. The question 12.3, it's set out in there.
Okay.
The Environment Agency has proposed a minor modification.
A minor?
No, it's a main. I don't know why it says minor, but it says minor in the response to the question. Yeah. But,
well, that might be the explanation. It isn't in schedule exam 23, I don't think.
I think it may have been superseded, but we can check on that.
Okay, can we just check on that one?
okay.
Okay, thank you. Well, I don't have any. Yeah, so Mr. Pike.
Okay, just to highlight that I made a personal comment on the light pollution.
Yes.
That the guidance defines different categories depending on the environment, and it's difficult. Well, it can't be applied without a decision on which category applies where and in which circumstances. There's no guidance on that. It might be something that could be done subsequently, but it is a shortcoming of that policy at the moment. Thank you.
This, which policy refers?
That's DM5.
DM5.
Point S. Perhaps I should say I'm a associate member of the Association of Lighting Designers, which is a theatrical focused body. Thank you.
Which may or may not be caught by this policy, I suppose.
In terms of the general knowledge about the subjects, though, not professional qualification.
Yeah.
At the moment, I noted it. It's something which is quite difficult to address at this point, but I'm highlighting it so that I think it's something that needs to be followed up on, possibly with an SPD.
Okay, well, I can have a look. I mean, it seems to set out a reasonable amount of detail and a process to go through to assess it.
The point is that when you read that guidance, you find that it defines 4 categories, and without knowing which of the categories applies in which circumstance, it's difficult to apply the policy.
Thank you. Anything else on those policies? If not, I'll move on again. Flood risk. Policy SP6. This is a strategic policy. There is a modification proposed to this. Okay. So yes, there's a number of changes that are proposed by way of the modification in here to the detailed wording. And these were agreed with the Environment Agency in the Statement of Common Ground, I think.
Yeah, that's correct, yes.
Yeah, so they're in the schedule there. I mean, this is one of the examples of a strategic policy that I suppose is also a development management policy. You've also got a quite detailed national policy and PPG that relate to this. I mean, I don't think anyone's picked up any, it hasn't brought to my attention any particular significant problems of inconsistency with national policy, but it was one of the purposes of going through it again with the Environment Agency to conduct that consistency check with NPPF and PPG.
I mean, the Environment Agency and Thames Water as well, they've commented throughout on the policy, and at Regulation 19, they include, they made some more suggestions. So we've taken those on board, and we've now have statements of common ground signed. Yes, but in considering what they were asking for, I mean, I've seen the statement of environment. Some of the things they proposed, you didn't decide to take forward as one, but some of them you did. We felt were kind of more minor amendments rather than main ones. But in considering their proposals, presumably, well, I say, reassured me that there was a sort of a sense check against NPPF. That's correct, yeah. Yeah, and the PPG. Okay. Right. I'll bring Paula Saunderson. I know obviously you've got an expertise in this. I don't know if you've got I know you obviously spent quite a considerable time examining the plan when you read it based on the regulation.
I've just got some suggestions. So on the main policy, after point T, it might be pertinent to mention that the Newbury and Thatcham area, which is one of the main areas for development, is designated by the Environment Agency as a flood risk area, and as such within the River Basin Management Plans, the Thames region, Basin 6, it has its own objectives. So within the Strategic Flood Risk Assessment Level 2 Addendum 1, it states that every planning application in this area should have a surface water drainage statement, I would say statement for minors, and a surface water drainage strategy, obviously for majors. And the NPPF concentrates on the flood risk zones, which are fluvial.
Mm.
Our problems here are a lot of pluvial off of the hills and masses of groundwater. Caroline will give you the numbers, but we're waiting for a 2024 flood risk, flood event section 19 review, which is being conducted by WSP and West Berkshire Council.
Mm.
And we've also got an emergency planning review. So we were in quite dire straits for a few months. This was an elongated period. So I'm really anxious that we try to pull in all the stuff from the various documents so that somebody looking at the policies can have something like an awareness of that point, which is mentioned in probably 2 or even 3 different places in the evidence base.
Yeah, so your suggestion would be a reference in, it's a long policy, SP6.
Yeah, in 6, yeah.
Yeah,
There's
no,
an extra point at T, after T.
An extra point.
Yeah. About the Newbury and Thatcham Environment Agency designated flood risk area.
And to reference what the SFRA said would be required in that.
SFRA level 1 addendum 1.
Where
the addendum 1 was added to consider the matter of cumulative impact assessment. And another point on that is that the cumulative impact assessment, I've attended a few national webinars, and it is an issue throughout the country. I've raised it with the MP through her office to go to DEFRA, and I've also raised it with the previous Service Director for Development and Regulation, that there are no methodologies for assessing cumulative impact.
When you say cumulative impact, you mean of different developments being in combination?
Yeah, I call it a thing called COD Africa. So some of the planning officers in Newbury have heard me use that term, and it's cumulative impact of development on flood risk in a catchment area. So we have a catchment area for the River Lambourne, we have a catchment area for the River Kennet, and we have a catchment area for the River Pine and for the River Thames. And the cumulative impact of developments is beginning to have its effects. We've got a development just up here of 401 houses, which is supposed to have state-of-the-art studs. But all the water in January, February, March, April missed the attenuation basin. And Mother Nature created her own below it. And we don't know how the rate of attenuation of that going into the river here. So it's becoming, with climate change, a much more important thing to do. So whether that can be reflected in the policy somehow, that the importance of the cumulative impact assessment, I'm not clear. I would leave that with you, sir.
No, okay. So I suppose by its nature, it's difficult to do in relation to any individual development.
Absolutely.
But I suppose the issue, is it not something that could or should have been picked up through the SFRA in looking at the development proposals?
Well, it obviously hasn't been here. We've got 2 different developers either side of the A339. And we have this issue of this surface water and lots of groundwater off those hills. And we've got, strategic underwater courses, which you can actually see now on that interactive map. You can layer on the surface water as well as the fluvial. So it hasn't happened there. We are trying to do, as a flood forum, we are trying to do our own investigation on that. So I'm not, because there's nothing in the MPPF or the PPG.
Right,
I'm
okay.
not sure how you would do it, but can I just put it on your radar?
You can put it on my radar. I'm not sure I'll find a solution, but anyway, thank you. I might.
Okay. The other point that I have is we don't have, in terms of flood risk, we don't have the promised green-blue infrastructure framework that was promised under the old policy SP18.
No, it's a core strategy policy, was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one was promised quite some time ago, and we don't have that green-blue infrastructure framework. So people are not aware necessarily of the buffer zones in relation to developments close to our main rivers.
So that would be a mapping exercise, essentially.
Yeah.
To,
yeah, and a typology.
Yeah.
So you were struggling with the public open spaces and the residential amenities, and we've also got the Natural England ANGS, accessible natural green spaces.
Yeah.
So we don't have that data for West Berks. So without that, we need a bit more diligence. Now, whether that can is reflected in a policy, I don't know, or some guidance.
okay.
But we don't have that awareness of that mapped infrastructure, which you will see in a lot of other plans. I, as a part of a project, I review other local plans.
But because, to learn of a good practice or relevance to.
Yeah, well, especially with all this, the nature-based solutions, we're not getting, I don't think we're maximising for the benefit of our rivers and our environment. What developers close to these main rivers and the bournes, the seasonal chalk bournes, because we haven't got that framework there to kind of like direct them. We've got no SPD basically, it's promise. And this, because it wasn't in that one, it's not brought forward as evidence in this one.
Okay.
So you haven't got that to look at.
Right, anything further on SP6?
Yes. Are you going to cover water quality and resources, or has that been done?
No, well, we did cover those policies the other day, but I will come on to those.
Okay, can I just make one small point then?
Well, shall we just deal with SP6 first, and then I'll come on to the MC?
But you are going to,
I will come on to those, yeah.
and that presumably resources means the sewage as well.
Well, it covers, yes, it does cover both those aspects. So,
at this point then.
yeah, okay.
Thank
So
you, sir.
3 points about SP6. Does the council or representatives want to come back on any of those? Is there anything there that you think is something that needs addressing that isn't addressed, or anyway, just respond.
Yep, sure. So in relation to the cumulative impact assessment, paragraph 160 of the NPPF just requires local authorities and strategic policies to consider the cumulative impacts of development affecting local areas susceptible to flooding. So as part of our level 1 SFRA, we had a cumulative impacts assessment done. So we've taken that into account. That work.
Sorry, in the SFRA?
It's an addendum to the level 1 SFRA.
Yeah.
And that makes some recommendations, mainly being the use of SUDs. So policy SP6, we have a requirement in there for SUDs, but what it also recommends, and I think this is where we need to make a modification to probably the supporting text, is that FRAs, they need to consider cumulative impact. So I think maybe there's a subsection in the supporting text on FRA, so we could, I think, usefully include something there. But we could also, I think, maybe go away and just look at the wording of the policy just to see if we need to make specific reference to cumulative impact.
Yeah, I think the clarification on the methodology would be really useful for everybody.
In terms of the methodology, there's not really anything in the PPG or MPPF about what methodology to use. But I think in FRAs, if cumulative impact assessments are to be, if consideration of those is made, I think then those preparing them need to maybe have regard to our cumulative impact assessment, and they can from that work out the type of things they need to consider.
Okay, thank you. So that's the cumulative impact. Okay, so I've noted that.
Yeah, and then in relation to the buffers, so policy SB6, the third paragraph from the end, there's a requirement in there for 10-metre buffers around main rivers, and that was included following advice from the Environment Agency. But in the schedule of modifications for policy SP10, we're proposing to include something around buffer zones in that.
SP10, that's the
Which
green.
is green
green
infrastructure.
yeah. Okay. Okay. So that when you told the third to last paragraph in SP6, this is a modification to it, is it, to refer to the 10-metre buffers?
No, so it's been included for a while. The Environment
10
Agency, I
metres,
think,
yeah,
made
sorry,
a
I've got-
suggestion at the regulation 18 stage.
Yeah, I've got it, yeah. So that's the Environment Agency's recommended buffer for
That's
some of
correct,
those main
yes.
rivers, yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. So that's, and then the other issue was about specific reference to the Newbury Thatcham area for the groundwater and surface water flood issues, I think.
We didn't have anything specific on that from the Environment Agency, but maybe if it's something we could go away and just look at and confirm and maybe liaise with them on it. And
Okay, thank you. Anything else from anyone else on this? No? Yeah, sorry. AWE residents.
I didn't actually make a representation, but I'd just like to echo the lady at the end has mentioned in relation to RSA 12, which is within the DEPZ zone of Burfield AWE. The development for 100 residential units, the Environment Agency recommended against that development as a consequence of runoff and sewerage issues. Equally, in relation to that area, the RB MP, the River Basin Management Plan, I have engaged with DEFRA, and the stream, which is on old maps going back to the early 1700s, is not factored on the River Basin Management Plan. And therefore, when considering the development, obviously the Environment Agency recognises there, but when your planning officers went through the exercise, the significance of this stream, which runs down into the Kennet, was not taken into consideration. Equally, the runoff from this area is quite substantial because we're in the lower Kennet Valley, and this will exacerbate what is very serious sewage overflows that we have in both Burfield and Mortimer. We have about sort of 600 units that are being built in that area. And there's substantial runoff and sewage issues in the area.
Okay, thank you. Right, so I think we've got some detailed considerations there on SB6. So I'm going to move on to DM6 and 7, which are about water quality and resources, which we did look at these policies the other day. But yes, water quality, and DM6 was entitled water quality, DM7 is entitled water resources and wastewater. And there was an action point relating to these to give some further consideration about what is actually said about assessing capacity and what was done at the plan stage and what is maybe required in terms of assessment when proposals brought forward and potential for phasing, etc. So there are some further considerations, further work going on that. You did say you had a point or points on. Mm-hmm.
We do have fair amount of sewage pollution and sewage flooding, and looking at each of the sites.
Right, so the point being that there are, from your perspective, upgrades to capacity of, we're not talking water supply, we're talking about wastewater treatment. Yeah, yeah, the file system. Yes, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Okay, thank you. Yeah. Right, so that what you've referred to endorsing the statement of common ground is the modification that was proposed and we discussed last week and asked you to reconsider and think about. So more issues about that and more perspectives on that. So thank you.
It looks quite harsh, but it's definitely needed because of all of our sources of.
Yeah, understood.
And we have a major problem on infiltration of groundwater into the foul sewer systems.
Yeah.
We've been tankering 24/7 since the 18th of January, just around the corner from there, and it's still going on.
Okay, thank you. Anything else from anyone on DM6, DM7? No, okay. Right, thank you for that. So again, there's some things there to ponder, and I think you've noted some points there, which brings us on to issue 12.6, which relates to a group of policies, SP9, and a number of development management policies. Yes, DM9 to DM14, all of which relate to different types of heritage assets or the historic environment. So we've got tabled yesterday or published yesterday, the proposed modifications. These are to policy SP9, DM9, 10 and 11. So 12, 13 and 14, which deal with some other heritage assets, particular types. Those are no modification proposed to those.
That's right.
Yeah, I wasn't missing something. No, okay. Right. So this is always a slightly tricky issue, as I've alluded to already, because we've got legislation relating to the listed buildings, conservation areas, etc., under the heritage assets, designated heritage assets. We've got national policy and guidance. We've got historic England guidance, and we have plan policy. So it's quite a lot of things to take into account. I mean, just to absolutely clear, I think I asked this either yesterday or at another time, the purpose, the intention of SP9 is to set out a strategic approach, and then DM policies that I've referred to, they set out more detail. But all of that is intended to be consistent with national policy and comply with the legislation, obviously, and provide more detail where it's needed for, you know, the particular assets in Berkshire. That's the intention.
It is, yes.
I suppose, and there was a submitted, well, no doubt there were probably earlier versions in Reg 18 or whatever, or maybe not, I don't know, but there was the submitted plan, and there was one set of modifications and another set of modifications, and that's ongoing discussion with Historic England and consideration of representations made, presumably.
It is, yes. So the latest set that were tabled yesterday, we have talked with Historic England, and they are happy with them.
Yeah.
They are happy that they comply with the MPPF, and we've been through and tried to pick up all the comments that we've received through the representations.
Okay, so there was an earlier statement of common ground with Historic England, and some modifications agreed to parts of the plan. But what prompted the further reassessment, going through the Reg 19 reps again and written statements made and,
Yes.
yeah, okay, thank you. I suppose it doesn't illustrate the, the difficulties in achieving this task, isn't there, of getting words that reflect and are consistent or don't contradict what's in national policy and providing the detail. Anyway, so SP9, I had a think about it yesterday afternoon and I went through it. So let me summarize how I think I understand it to make sure I've got it right, and then we can look at detailed parts as necessary. NPPF talks about having, plans including a positive strategy for the historic environment. So this is what this is. And it starts out with things that the council will do as a positive action towards the historic environment.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's picking up some of the suggestions that have been made about, conservation area appraisals and things like that.
That's right.
That's the first part. The second part then, so this is the second paragraph, and A to G basically catalogues the different sorts of heritage assets, designated and non-designated, that are relevant to West Berkshire. And they are then subject, or most of those, if not all, are then subject to subsequent DM policies. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's so far. Then we start getting into NPPF decision-making territory, don't we? Because we're into how assessing the impact that development may have on a heritage asset. So it deals with issues of preserving, enhancing, and revealing significance. It deals with the weight being given according to significance. Yeah. It talks about statements of heritage significance being, providing information about that. Then it deals with the issues in NPPF terms of substantial harm and loss. And that's fleshed out in parts H to L. Less than substantial harm, and that the public benefits test, and then non-designated assets are more just a balancing test. Then there's something about information requirements and historic environment record, which is sort of reflecting, again, NPPF PPG. And finally, the enabling development clause that had been there, taking that out because it's basically giving development plan status to something that by definition is outside that process. Right, okay, so you're nodding in terms of the basic anatomy of this and what it's doing.
Yes. That's right.
And I have to say, I think reading it through again and thinking about it, I didn't detect any, I couldn't detect any significant inconsistencies with NPPF wording. So I suppose on that basis, broadly happy. I still have this slight unease of having, as a decision maker, being faced with this and NPPF and the legislation, but I can see what it's doing. Anyway, so is there anything else you want to say by way of explanation? If not, I'll see if anyone else has got anything to say from, yes, of course, Mr. Pick. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I just briefly state, I don't want to dwell upon what we do in any detail, but the Heritage Forum is a formally constituted body set up by the council, I think in 2010, and it represents, by definition, all the voluntary heritage activities in the district, whether by parish councils or town councils or by voluntary bodies. There are 35 or so voluntary societies concerned with heritage. There are all the other councils, not all of whom have heritage activity, but many of them do. And we interface, and I think this is still true despite the changes, notwithstanding the changes, I'm sure that they are acceptable to us, in 4 areas: local listing, which we're responsible for a certain period, the historic environment action plan, the identification of asset risks, and the development of conservation area appraisals. I'm happy with the wording that I've seen on all of those. I'm very happy with it.
This is in the wording of this policy SP9, yes, with the strike through and the additions.
Because the area where I'm particularly happy is the transfer of the references to conservation area appraisals from the text, this text area to the policy area.
Yeah.
Yeah, one area that I would like to perhaps raise is the issue of time limits.
Is what, sorry?
Time limits.
Yeah, where does this appear?
Yes, we can make, we've made recommendations on local listing 2 years ago. We made and these are about with the appointment of the new and excellent conservation officer about to be tackled. But for a year at least, we're extraordinarily frustrated with things done with them. The 39 local listing decisions have gone through. 35 heritage assets have been locally listed. We recommended a further 8, and they were stuck. Similarly, with the Heritage Development Historical Environment Action Plan, that's now 2 years old. We made recommendations that. I'm not blaming anyone around this table because there have been all kinds of changes. Similarly, with the conservation area appraisals, their conservation areas were defined 1970s and 80s. There's one on Newbury, which is now under draft and being very closely examined. There are another 50 or so which need doing. And what I'm really asking is for some kind of time constraint so that these 3 issues, these 3 points, remain high up on the priority list of the council. Because something comes along, some important planning issue comes along, and suddenly we're priority number 2. If you remain priority number 2 forever, then things tend not to happen. So for those 3 areas, local listing, historic environment action plan, and progressing conservation area appraisals, I would like some kind of time limit suggested.
Thank you. Okay. Other than that, you've had a chance to read through the policy whilst you've been.
Yes, I was very comfortable when it was first drafted, and it hasn't been significantly altered since.
Okay.
What I'm looking for is a
commitment and a
way
yes, understood. Okay. Well, do you want to come back on that point, and then we'll move on to the DM policies relating to the particular different types of heritage assets?
I think the council would share that frustration
Mm,
with
yes.
time limit, but ultimately it's down to resources.
Yeah, so I mean, you'd love to be able to say you could do these things whenever, this year, next year, but it's a resource issue. Yeah, understood.
Tends to be sometime never, I'm afraid.
Well, yeah, I understand that.
But things have changed.
Yeah.
So in the last few months, with the appointment of new conservation officer,
yeah,
there've been quite dramatic alteration.
I mean, I suppose, as you said, the reference to these in the policy itself, you know, is a commitment on behalf of the council. So, you know, I'll have a think. I understand the point, but I also understand the practical issue. Could you turn the mic off?
Of course.
Yeah, thank you. Now, right. So let's move on to the other policies. Again, I'll just run through in terms of conservation areas. So this deals with development in or affecting the setting of views to and from. So that's the kind of package of what it's dealing with here. It's setting a basic test to preserving, enhancing character and appearance, significance. And then it sets out these criteria to inform, and this is where we're getting into the detail of that isn't in the NPPF, of what you will be looking at in terms of the you know, the sort of the setting, the settlement pattern, the landscape. Then you're getting into layout and views and building forms, materials, and aspects of detailed design. So it's a sort of detailed approach to go through in terms of looking at, as I say at the beginning, you're defining what brought into scope, development in or affecting the setting of. So understood. And again, I didn't. And then you bring in things like traffic and uses, which I suppose are issues that can affect character, that may not affect natural appearance directly. So, yeah, okay. Just by way of just interest and background, are these policies again carried forward from previous core strategy and development management, or are they something that's been this level of detail that have been brought in?
They were included in a different form in the old Newbury District Local Plan.
Right.
Then when we prepared the core strategy, we had an overarching, the equivalent of SP9, essentially. But there was always felt that there was that, because the historic environment policies weren't saved in 2008. And there was always the feeling that that it would be helpful to have them because of the nature of West Berkshire.
Yeah, okay. Right, okay. And finally, the issue of demolition. Basically, it's saying that in most cases demolition won't be allowed, but there are some circumstances where it can be justified basically in setting those out.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I don't have any further points, questions, so we'll move on again. The next one again is listed buildings. So another, obviously there's a lot of listed buildings. You provided the numbers for these, didn't we, somewhere in here, but so this again, it defines the scope of the policy, which is about development affecting the listed building or its setting. The question, yes, I did have a question about this one. So the first thing, or one of the things that the development would have to demonstrate is why it is desirable or necessary. What's the justification for that? This is part A. It seems to be starting from a premise that you shouldn't be doing anything affecting a listed building or its setting.
In effect, that is the premise, yes.
Okay. But if you took that out and everything, you complied with everything else, would it matter? I can see it.
Be showing that through the statement of heritage significance.
Is what, sorry?
You'd be showing that, I think, anyway, through the statement of heritage significance.
That would be a step that you'd be doing as part of that, the first step in the process.
Yeah.
So it's reflecting that. Okay. And is that Historic England guidance for statement of heritage significance?
Yes, and that's referred to in SP9.
Okay. The second part B talks about demonstrating how the significance of the listed building and or its setting will be preserved. Should it refer to or enhanced?
It could do.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose if you demonstrate you're preserving it, it's well, but yeah, okay. Well, yeah, and again, it's a sequence of sort of further detail provided about how you're going to assess these things once you've set up the sort of test at the beginning. So, okay, I can understand the rationale and the approach here. So I'll move on again. Non-designated heritage assets. These are things that you've defined earlier, haven't you, as being things that are either on the local list or you've become aware of either through other means. Actually, you've got another category, haven't you, of things that aren't formally on the local list, but
we have category G.
Yeah. And then there could be things that are even you just become aware of through a planning application that's put to you, and by looking at it, you realise there's a locally significant heritage there. Okay. So this reflects SP9 and the NPPF in terms of a balanced judgment, and these are the things that you take into account here. Right. Yes, Mr. Pick.
Yes, thank you. Just to say that I'm particularly interested in this because the whole of the local listing process is managed by the Heritage Forum, up to the point at which a decision is needed. We received a lot of assistance and support and cooperation through the years on that particular subject, and the committee which runs the Heritage Forum has ex officio West Berkshire Council officers on it, together with a heritage champion. So that's the mechanism whereby we work together.
Are you content with the wording of this policy?
Yeah. Well, a reference to the local listing process would be appreciated, but it is referred to elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's in the back of SP9, I think, somewhere.
Yeah.
But as it's relevant here, it could perhaps be added. But we identify the assets to be locally listed, often from volunteers, because they have to prepare the proposal. It's put in front of an independent selection panel of completely independent heritage specialists who recommend or don't recommend it for being forwarded. As 11 panel of 11, which we've maintained over the years, but usually about 5 turn up. And then when that's been drafted and 34 minutes are prepared, they then go to the head of planning, and after consideration and research by the conservation officer, then approved or not approved by the head of planning.
Okay.
And this works very well, and I hope it will continue. And any recommendations from the Berkshire Council on local listing would also be.
Okay. I mean, going back to SP9, it deals with the non-designated heritage assets and a commitment to maintaining a local list. So that's where your role is.
Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
And then we've got in the types of heritage asset, the list includes those on the local list and those that are not on the list but are of significance, and they could be on the West Berkshire Historic Environment.
And that very long list, we're going to take about 50 years to get through to make it going. So if it could be speeded up, hence my barracking earlier on, it could be speeded up.
Yeah.
And we would have 2 meetings of the selection panel year rather than 1. It was very nice, but I do appreciate that other people have other tasks.
I suppose the only point arising out of that, is there any need for policy DM11 to refer to the local listing process again, where it's dealt with in the strategic approach?
I think it's covered by SP9 and also in the supporting text to this policy.
Okay.
It also covers a DM12, because the local listing, we can locally list a park or garden.
Yes.
And I've actually done so. That's registered parks and gardens, but there are there are unregistered parks and gardens which merit local listing. I would love to locally list the site of the Second Battle of Newbury, but it would require a great deal of detailed work. So keep me going. I'm 84. Keep me going for a few years. An asset of archaeological importance will similarly locally listed.
Okay, so when we come on to the DM12, 13 and 14, again, they are reflecting particular types of designated heritage assets that there are in the district. There are a number of registered parks and gardens. I think we've got a number. There's one registered battlefield at the moment, is there?
There is, yes.
The policy's registered battlefields, I suppose.
Yes.
There could be another one that found somewhere.
Well, there's the Second Battle of Newbury.
Right.
And the area
has taken place. It's not that.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
But the area hasn't been defined.
Right.
But there's a lot of debate and discussion about whether it should be registered. So that's why the policy has been flexible.
Yeah.
Say battlefields.
Yeah. Okay. And again, I have to confess, I didn't go through these in the detail. I went through the other ones yesterday. But again, this is a similar sort of approach to defining what is in the scope of the policy, and then setting out some criteria, relevant factors that need to be taken into account. Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. I don't have any further questions on that group of policies. And Mr. Pick, your nameplate is still up. Do you have anything further you wish to say to me?
No, thank you. I'm very happy with the reply.
Good.
And with the support that we're getting.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So we'll have a break in a minute before we move on to the matter 13. But just before we do, I've got one further policy on DM 39. So this is policy. It does two things. One, it seeks to protect existing local community facilities for understandable reasons, and it sets out some tests that you'd go through. So that's the second part of it. The first part supports new development of new local community facilities, provided a number of criteria are met. The first of which is demonstrating a local need. I think have I raised this already? I don't know. Anyway, I did raise it. I think you responded and said, well, it's important in rural areas. But I didn't quite still understand why there is a need to a requirement to demonstrate a local need. If someone has gone to the trouble of putting a planning application in for a community facility, that presumably is a good thing, why do they have to demonstrate it's needed? What's the concern that this is addressing?
This really relates to protecting facilities in small rural villages.
It is what, sorry?
Protecting facilities.
No, not the protecting one, about the proposals, the first part of DM 39. This is for new or expanded community facilities.
Yeah.
It requires the proposer to demonstrate a local need for it.
Maybe.
Any,
I know what you mean.
I think it's addressing the point that, yes, I understand your point about an application being put in and the trouble that goes into that. But then again, the council needs to be satisfied that something's not going to be built that's just not going to be used.
Mr. Pike?
Yeah, it's just Thatcham Town Council for this point, but don't have a badge. Yeah, I have a question relating to this, which might answer that point A to some extent. To what extent does this policy apply to community facilities built as part of a strategic development, such as SP 17? Yeah. Yeah. To what extent does this policy apply to community facilities built as part of a strategic development?
The whole of this policy?
Well, obviously only the first part, because you're not going to remove them as part of, well, I guess you could, but obviously the policy SP 17 includes from that list in 1262 healthcare facilities, areas of outdoor space and recreation, shops, possibly shop selling essential goods and halls. And they're provided as part under the policy SP 17. This policy would, in addition, well, I think it might be valuable that the need is demonstrated, because developers can propose things which are expedient rather than necessarily fulfill or they don't know what the local need is. But on the other hand, the policy point D requires that they're subject to meaningful local community consultation, which is not otherwise inherent in policies like SP 17, or it may be as a result of the main modifications. But there's a question as to the extent to which this policy it falls under the strategic development, or whether it's just freestanding development.
Okay. Your preference would be you would like these criteria applied to the SP 17?
I think, well, strategic developments in general, there may be other developments which are come forward outside the plan, which are big enough to justify this as well. So yes, I think it would be desirable that is the case. It's the policy is silent on it, and I couldn't work out whether it was intended or not. I think it should be intended. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to respond to that particular point? I have not got any more questions about it. Would these criteria be? I mean, some of them may or may not be relevant once you've gone to you've got a proposal that includes community facilities within it.
Maybe some of the criteria would relate to the provision of community facilities on the strategic sites, but Don't think the policy is intended to generally deal with the strategic sites, because the policies for the strategic sites have the requirements stated within them.
So, for example, the need issue, you'd have said that's been sorted out. We've identified there's a need for a school and a community and a health centre.
That's correct. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But you would still be looking for it to be accessible and inclusive, for example, and some of the other criteria, they'd still be relevant.
Could be relevant, yes.
Yeah, okay. Right, okay, thank you. Yeah.
But there are two sorts of community facilities. There's those which can be afforded by voluntary bodies, and those which can be afforded by commercial organisations. If you want to go to St John's Hall, you pay one fee. If you want to go to the rugby club, you pay another. And it's very important that for voluntary societies all over the district, they're able to lay hands on those charging a social rate, which can be afforded by retired people, those which are rented by commercial organisations for product releases, for example. That was the point I would like to stress.
Yeah,
if I may.
Yes, I think I understand. So I think what this policy does, as well as dealing with the circumstances in which new community facilities should be provided, it protects those that are there for those reasons, I think. Is that what you basically... Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, understood. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Pike.
Thank you. So I think actually all of the 5 points, A to E, could be applied to North East Thatcham in certain regards. For example, we have the two listed buildings within the site, within the area of the site for which point E might be applicable about appropriate reuse. So I think it would be obviously to be considered because they're outside the ownership, but it's something that might be a valuable use of those sites and would be focus the minds of the developers to think about the option. So it would be worthwhile making it clear that this policy does apply.
Okay.
It's not
Well, I think maybe what we'll do is we'll come back, we'll look specifically at the North East Thatcham proposal again when we come back week after next, I think. And we can bear in mind what this policy is saying in relation to community development and see what the policy itself there is saying. Okay, thank you. Unless there's anything else on these development management policies, we'll have a break until, so we say 3:20, and then we'll come back and deal with the issues of under matter 13. Okay. Yep.
I just ask, to what extent are you going to be discussing the final point? Is it about next steps in the examinations?
Not all that much, because the next step actually, we're coming back in the week after next.
Okay.
When these were programmed, this could have been the last hearing session. It isn't the last hearing
That's
session.
basically an announcement which people can pick up online should they need to, rather than discussion. Thank you.
We did. I may as well mention it now in case people are leaving, just for the sake of it. So we have got a day the week after next, and that's relating specifically to North East Thatcham. That's the Wednesday. That will be the only sitting day that week. Then we've got 2 more reserved days that we've now agreed on, I think, which I don't know if the website's been updated or not yet by Ian, but I'll check, which are the 23rd and 24th of July. So that's a Tuesday and Wednesday in July.
Yes.
Yeah. And that's in case there are any further matters that I decide we need to come back and discuss further. Okay, so we'll break there for 15 minutes and we'll come back at 3:20, please. No, those of us who are still interested, thank you. Thank you. No, don't worry. I know it's difficult sometimes, isn't it? Yeah. Let's resume now. I mean, the first two items on the agenda now are things that are just were sort of I put on when the action points were first issued, not because I've got anything particularly to follow up, but it was just an opportunity to just to make sure there's nothing anybody wishes to query or say about the responses to action point 1, which we've already discussed with Mr. Pike. It arose from a point he'd made, and I took the opportunity to discuss it then when we met the following week on the North East Thatcham. I put it on the agenda for today in case there was anyone else with an interest in this that wasn't there then that is here now, but I don't have anything further to ask about this. I don't know whether there's anything further on deliberation you want to query or the same, Mr. Pike, but
there's 2 points really.
Yeah.
The first one is that the council has not considered the results of the comments on the sustainability appraisal at Reg 19. I won't call it a consultation because I don't believe it was. And just to reiterate, if I didn't say it before, that I made a freedom of information request to the council for internal documentation about how they had considered it. Their response was that they referenced public documents, which or in documents of in the examination library, which do not address it at all. And they said there was no further documentation. So I am bewildered as to how the council could have reasonably considered the results of the sustainability appraisal without having produced any written documentation on the matter. And that is important because my understanding, and it's a legal point, so I'll defer to you and to the council's barrister, that there is a requirement to do so before the legal statutory requirement before it goes to before the document is submitted for examination. There's a question about terminology there. The other points that I was making were really supporting points that relating to the actual consultations. I think if you look at the calls for evidence, calls for comments for the Reg 18 and particularly the Reg 19 consultation, and compare them with the statutory requirements for the content of the consultation on the sustainability appraisal, you will see that not all of the elements are fulfilled. So there's a clear demonstrable non-compliance. Whether that is material is for you to consider, but the inference that I draw is that it wasn't at the time intended to be a formal consultation on sustainability appraisal. And what we have before us is an ex post justification for it having been so. Certainly when the council's response said that I had managed to find a way of responding, I think that is certainly my recollection, that I found it very difficult and I sort of contrived to find a way of including it in the format of the Reg 19 consultation. But I think anybody other than the planning professional faced with the volume of documentation of a Reg 19 consultation would have been very fortunate to get to that without any clear evidence that it was a specific matter to be consulted on. Thank you.
Okay, those are the points you made before. Yeah, you're just reiterating them. Yeah, okay. Okay, well, I don't think I need to ask the council to go back over them, because I think I've had the responses previously. But sorry, just on the just to make sure I've remembered it right. In terms of the consideration given to the comments made, the consideration was, you say you considered them, you read them as officers, and the what was reported is the summary in the consultation statement, and it's embedded within in appropriate places throughout in relation to different policies, etc. So that's Mr. Pike looking for more through his freedom of information request.
That's how we dealt with the comments.
That's what you said is what was catalogued, and the dispute is, well, does that provide evidence that you considered them?
Yes.
I was unable to find any reference whatsoever of consideration of the sustainability appraisal for Regulation 19. For Regulation 18, I think there is some, but not for Regulation 19.
So in the consultation statement, when it says, for example, the North Sea Thatcham site, and it lists the issues that summarises the issues that were raised, you don't find anything there that refers to issues that raised about this.
I have to go back and look at it, but I don't recall seeing anything which referenced the sustainability appraisal rather than the responses to the policy itself.
Okay. Right. Okay. Understood. Thank you. Right, the next one again, it was just for completeness, just in case anybody had any point on the Cheveley settlement boundary. This was an issue when we talked about the settlement boundaries and there was a particular reconsideration given to a particular boundary at Cheveley and Morfitts Lane. I mean, you proposed a change to the policies map. So that's set out in the map. I mean, is it, just to be clear then, does that go back to where the boundary was in the time it was in the adopted plan before? Was that the core strategy?
It goes back to the HSA DPD.
Oh, the DPD,
existing
sorry.
boundary in effect.
Okay, thank you. Right, which brings us on to the final two things on the list. So we had quite a lengthy discussion in week one, I think it probably was, about policy SP4, isn't it? Yeah, sorry. The wording of it and what it was intending to achieve. And then we talked about how it had been influenced the spatial strategy. I don't particularly want to go over how the DEPZ has influenced the spatial strategy again, because I think that's, it's been explained and it isn't altered by the change to the wording of this policy. But just actually going back to something I raised this morning about why the scale of development and the location of development has been restricted. We talked about 11B and then PPF and footnote 7. Now, obviously this particular restrictive policy isn't one that's caught by that. So it's a different test, isn't it? It doesn't fall within the NPPF 11B test, does it? That doesn't mean it's not justified. The justification is through the explanation for the whole approach to the DEPZ and the whole rationale for it.
Yes, and obviously the REPIR legislation as well, and the need to.
The legislation.
Yes, the
Yes.
REPIR legislation.
Yeah.
And the public safety, and that obviously is trying to balance, isn't it? The land use planning and the REPIR legislation.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's fine. So it doesn't, the way that the NPPF 11B is structured, it doesn't lend itself to this because it isn't included in the footnote, but it's yeah. Okay, understood. So that's that. And I suppose that we may come back to that now with the way this test is set up, this policy is set up. So thank you for doing that. And you say that it was in collaboration with the ONR and AWE. Just from the outset, just to be clear, have you got any outstanding? Are you both in agreement with the revised wording?
We are, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Thanks.
again, if you read this, it takes into account the comments we made during our hearing statement. So yes, we're happy with it now.
Okay.
So.
But fine. Thank you for coming anyway. And just in case there's any further points or questions, you can help us get to the bottom of. So the way that the policy has been restructured was to simplify it and to clarify it. And basically the essence of the policy now, it says that permission will be refused if there is an unacceptable risk to the off-site emergency plan and or an adverse effect, or the development would adversely affect the defence operations or capability. So it could be one or both of those things. That's the basic criteria. And then it goes on to say in the DEPZ, the permission is likely to be refused if the ONR, as the statutory consultee and advisor on this, advise against the development. And then there's reference to consultation criteria and things. So that's the policy and the approach. So that's relative, well, that's clear enough. I suppose the question is, how will unacceptable risk to the off-site emergency plan be assessed? And I think this comes back to some of the issues raised previously about the extent to which clarity can be provided about this. What has gone from this, and it was slightly confusing before, hence the need for clarification, was the reference to population increase and whether that's residential and or people being in the area. So that isn't there anymore. So we have a test, which is unacceptable risk to the off-site emergency plan. To what extent is the scale of development and the extent to which more people would be living or working or visiting the DEPZ a critical factor in that?
Just to make clear that what we removed was the consultation criteria.
Yes.
ONR, so it wasn't
Yeah.
necessarily their decision-making criteria,
Yes,
if that
yes.
makes sense. So that's come out just
Yes.
for clarity, because I think it was causing confusion
Yeah.
around how things
Yeah.
are and stuff.
But the way the policy was sort of expressed before, it used those consultation criteria to be brought into the decision-making about impact on safety.
In the supporting text, I do
Yeah.
need to find it because it's quite convoluted now with all the strike throughs. And there is reference to ONR decision-making process is detailed on its website, and that's at paragraph 4.54. So that's the decision-making process, and obviously it also links to the consultation criteria, which will be on ONR's website.
Yeah, so the reference to the ONR's decision-making process detailed on its website with a footnote 19, this is retained. Right, so if I were to follow that link and I went through and the ONR's decision-making process, would that provide some specific things that they'd be taking into account when assessing the impact on safety then?
I believe it would, but it might be best for ONR to chip in on that one.
Because but yes, I will. But so from the council's point of view, well, whether it was intended before or not, reference to population increase was certainly something that was factored into the policy. And it appeared to me that it was factored into when permission would be refused, as well as when you would consult, because of the sort of cross references between the two. Maybe that wasn't the intention or not, but anyway, it's gone. So you don't think, for clarity, there is a need to refer to that being a key factor in assessing safety, an increase in people being in the emergency planning zone?
But we kind of thought in the round that we've added in an extra bit about pre-app discussions, which obviously that will then, those discussions will come out and that discussion can take place at the time. It can be included. I thought that there was a confusion around the population increase and the term the population
There was, the way it was expressed, yeah.
So what we were trying to do was
Yeah.
it. And so actually, if you think we stripped it out too much, we can add some more back in. But
okay, well, let's think about, let's see what the ONR say, and then let's think about the extent to which population size, i.e. the number of people, is critical in formulating the offsite emergency plan, and how far a change in it would be critical to the operation of that plan. Because that seems to be, I mean, if that is the basic thing you're looking at, I don't think there's necessarily harm for the policy saying that. Because there was talk before about whether it's an embargo, in effect, on any more people or not, or whether there was, you were back into that appeal decision, weren't we, where there was this, whole discussion about whether it affects safety or not, and it was the way it went was you can't just look at population, you have to look at where it is, wind direction, the risk, and so many things that could be brought in. And it seems to me the potential here, you're back into opening that up again. But let's see what the ONR says, and we'll see what the
Good afternoon, sir. So, and I think this is understood in everyone's mind, but I will restate it for clarity. Obviously, the table that we initially had were triggering factors. When would you come to ONR? And we have been in discussion with the council about, in response to your action points, how we could clarify those triggers, and we do have a proposal on how the text can be clarified. But effectively, the trigger clarification, the trigger is in reference to what the development site is currently used for. Is there an increase in the population as a result of the proposal? So that's how we do the trigger. You are correct in assessing the impact of the offsite and assessing the impact of a proposed development on the offsite emergency plan once it has been triggered. Increase in population is something we will give consideration to, but it's also the disposition of the population. It is the evidence being supplied from statutory testing. There are other ways of impacting on the offsite emergency plan other than just the scale of the increase, although that is an important one. With external hazards, those are all listed on our website, so you can determine what might constitute an external hazard. If I understand your point correctly, so you would like us to list factors that may impact on an offsite emergency plan?
No, I wasn't saying, I haven't reached a conclusion. I'm just, I suppose, reflecting back the discussion we had previously. On one hand, there was need for clarity about what the purpose of the policy is, and I think that's clearly been clarified. There are two key things. One is the effect on the safety, the offsite emergency plan, so safety, and one is on the operations of the and the external hazards to the facilities, so the establishment. So that's clear enough. I suppose it's just I just wanted to explore the extent to which it provides the clarity, bearing in mind the, sort of the background to the decision making that you've had in the past, in terms of the things that you do and do not want to have big discussions about every time you get an assessment like this, because there seemed to be, before it wasn't totally clear, but there seemed to be two ways of viewing it. Either it was a total embargo because any increase in population you're going to refuse, or it wasn't, and you can just start taking into account various things. So, but I think, so yes, you're saying that population change is a significant thing, but there are others.
Yes, sir. So for example, where we have previously been tolerant, for example, we are less concerned by a commercial population increase, where the council has developed a framework of using planning conditions around emergency planning, than we are, say, around a residential increase, where there is no way of enforcing such controls. And that has been something in previous cases where a scale of population increase has been tolerable in one format, but not tolerable in another. So we have always been dependent on a dialogue with the council. Our criteria when we in terms of advising against or not is, can the council provide adequate assurance? In this area, in the present moment, we believe the offsite emergency plan is, as a general strategic level, stretched. So we have to seek a high level of assurance from the council about how any individual development can be accommodated, and that has in the past taken various forms. There are consistent ways that various developments have been acceptable. There are consistent ways in which various developments have been unacceptable to us.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, going back, I suppose, to the experience of deciding these things in the past, and the way that the core strategy policy was, I mean, there's lessons learned there, presumably, from what would help you as as a consultee and decision-making body. Do you want to just sort of, any observations on that?
The adequacy of the plan is what we're regulated against, if you like, and that's where ONR come in to test our adequacy of the plan. And the best way of testing that plan, thankfully without a real incident, is actually doing exercises. And we did an exercise April last year, just remember now. The outcome of that exercise was a letter from the regulators, which clearly, based on sort of the lessons identified from that exercise, which clearly expressed significant concerns about the adequacy of the plan, in particular in relation to any increase in development around either of the DUB said sites. So it was recognised at that point that we haven't, there is an issue, and there's certainly if an emergency did happen. Mrs. Saunderson was mentioning, Ms. Saunderson, sorry, earlier on was mentioning about flooding. That's a complex emergency. Having one with radiation emergency is a significantly more complex incident that we'd have to deal with. And the challenges are therefore significantly higher as well. So we don't take it lightly. We do a case by case, and we prefer to have pre-app side of things coming in, because there may be exceptions. But as the DEPZ starts to, has increased in size, in part because of legislation changes and a significant change certainly around about Burfield, it has made the situation significantly more difficult for us.
Yeah, okay. Right, does Residents Association, your perspective on this?
Yes, I mean, first of all, thank you very much to the ONR, AWE and the council for redrafting the response. So that's appreciated.
The mic a bit closer.
Yep.
Thanks.
I have reviewed the revised policy, and there are a couple of things that I'd like to highlight. First of all, we did discuss this last time, but I'd just like to first of all focus on the consequences report. So the consequences report actually influences the shape and the decision-making associated with the AWE policy. And they're very distinct, both sites. So Burfield has a 12 kilometre zone, and Aldermaston is 15. Now, having reviewed that revised policy, there is no reference to those distances. There is a reference to 12 kilometres, but there's no reference to the 15. Whereas these sites are very distinct. They are separate. Whilst they're both AWE, they have different emergency zones, reference points around them. And whilst the 15-kilometre consultation zone is there, I'm very concerned that there's no reference to this 15 in the updated policy. Because, you know, if you want a developer or a landowner to get into a application consultation with the council, they need to understand specifically where their development sits within relation to the zones. So the distance between, you know, 12 kilometres and 15 kilometres, it's only 3 kilometres, but then if you think of that as a radius and you take that around the whole of AWE Aldermaston, that is quite an extensive piece of land. Equally, we also have an overlap of the zones. So if you look at the both sites, you have basically an overlap where you have the consultation zones. So I think we need to benefit both people that are currently living within the zones, but also potential applicants, so they fully understand that the consequences report is very significant, and it does actually sort of talk to the ultimate resultant policy where then that decision-making process takes place.
And anything else about the specific wording of the policy as it is now?
It's been refined, so thank you very much. I'm very concerned that there is this grey area, but we need that flexibility. But I'd just like to give you an example of something that's happened in the last 4 weeks or so. So there's been a consultation with regard to a planning application within the Burfield DPZ.
Yeah.
And it is for a site where the council have identified that there is no issue with this proposed development. It's basically resulting in a potential increase in population. The ONR have followed suit and said they have no issue on that. But then subsequently, within a week, the AWE have actually flagged that they oppose it. So that is an example. This is happening in real time. So we have the policy, but then we're having these conflicts. Now, I think the AWE are also significant in the consultation process. I know obviously the ONR, the regulator, and there is a process that follows that. Should a planning application be rejected and then challenged by the developer, but we are having the council saying there's no issue when we know that the off-site emergency plan is very, very fragile at the moment. Okay, within the last 2 or 3 weeks, they've said that's not a problem with regard to this planning application. It will result in a cumulative impact and increase of population. The ONR have followed suit on that and said no issue. But then we have AWE coming in a week later saying the complete opposite. So this again, you know, the communities would benefit from clarity and understanding, because it is really unnerving. Because if there is an incident, it's going to be very serious. You know, we've been aware of this since 2011, and this has been escalating. And it arrived at government at 2019 with the REPA. We knew that the Burfield zone was going to increase from a population of the original from 89, and now we're in 7,000. You know, this is really significant, and we're five years down the road from when REPA was approved.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's helpful. Yeah. In terms of the reason justification, doesn't have paragraph numbers in the revised version, but anyway, it's clear that the consultation with the ONR and the AWE stroke MOD, so that they're both consultees for proposals that meet the consultation criteria. The way the policy is expressed, it talks about development within the DPZ is likely to be refused planning permission where the ONR as regulator of the nuclear licensed sites advise against proposed development. So is there a different status to the consultation responses from ONR as opposed to the AWE? Do they serve a different purpose? Are they advising on slightly different things?
So, I mean, I think the ONR is regulator in terms of the offsite emergency plan. That's what they are. They're the regulator of that. And so therefore, if they are going to object to that, the ONR, that has a higher weight.
So there is
that's why that paragraph, that sentence has been put in there.
Yeah. Okay. Right. I'll just say provision and then I'll come back to the so provision.
Thank you, sir. So we know with interest the quite significant modifications to SP4. I still echo concerns that there is grey areas. It's still quite difficult for an applicant or a developer to interpret it and how to react. There are interchanged phrases: will be refused, likely to be refused, for example. We touched upon adversely affect. How does a developer determine whether their proposal is likely to adversely affect and potentially come up with mitigation strategies to address those adverse effects? I think it is encouraging that the policy is now saying it's not a complete moratorium or embargo on development. That is potentially helpful. The reference to pre-application consultation, that's potentially helpful as well. But it still is a lot of vague. It's not a clear policy. So we would be concerned it's not complying with MPPF 16 and having clear interpretation, allowing a decision maker, allowing an applicant to have clear understanding of what the policy is trying to achieve and how a developer should react to it, or a decision maker. Well, one other quick point is there's now, I think it's at 4 amended text, paragraph 440 of the supporting text. That seems to amalgamate various parts of the MPPF, including the agent of change concept from in the old 2021 MPPF was paragraph 190. So that's understood in principle. But one query I would put your way, sir, would be the agent of change. Does that not work both ways? So the DEPZ, that could change. That's an agent on change on what existing established businesses and occupiers in the area. It's working both ways. It's not a one way, it's not a unilateral. In terms of change as written, the implication seems to be that the agent of change effect is anything coming into the area and how it affects AWE. But these decisions about the DEPZ are affecting, they're going the other way. They're affecting and they are potentially reducing, removing opportunity for existing businesses to expand, for example. That said, very interesting to pick up on the comment that ONR is less concerned about the commercial population. So these are things I think are really important to get clarity over, because this policy is going to have significant effects on our client, particularly Hope and Clay, with an established facility which they moved to less than 10 years ago on the basis that they moved from a site that they needed to expand into and could have future expansion. So this policy and its lack of clarity at the moment, it is a significant headache for them, shall we say. So we are looking for that clarity. I think it's going in the right way, potentially, but we still feel so it's areas to be made clearer, so that decision makers and applicants have a better idea of how they can come up with mitigation strategies. I'd also just finish off to say, what is this consistent with what else is going on elsewhere in the UK in terms of managing these issues? Is the approach consistent? I mean, it can't be the only area of the UK where managing development control in these emergency planning areas is happening. So we're not clear that there is a consistent approach, because we're finding it difficult to follow the trail of evidence that backs up these decisions.
Yeah, okay. I'll just explore a couple of things there with you, if I could. First of all, you say there's grey areas and there's it's lack of clarity. But I mean, planning policies are always expressed in terms of, impact on character and appearance or landscape. And it's hard to pinpoint down, isn't it? I mean, one way to provide clarity, we sort of went around this before, but I mean, if there is a moratorium because of the situation we're in now and any increase in population, which is what could have been the meaning of the policy before, that would provide clarity. but it wouldn't provide flexibility, which on one hand you're looking for. So how would you provide clarity but also flexibility in a situation like this?
Well, straight away picking up on the example, clarity about is the particular concern about residential population or commercial population? Is it a one size fits all in terms of population, or is there a distinction between the two? That would be one obvious point where clarity would be welcome.
Yeah. Okay. So have you? I mean, are we back to this consideration of some sort of criteria-based things that would be taken into account in assessing safety? Is that what would that provide clarity?
Potentially, I think it would, and I think we've got to understand is this policy. Obviously, the council is responding to live issues in the exam, and it's got modified wording, but is it getting us further forward to clarity? It's sort of suggesting there's flexibility by pre-application consultation, etc. But if we dig beneath that, is it actually the effect, ultimately the effect when you take it through to conclusion, that any population increase is going to be a problem?
That's what I was trying to explore with them.
Yeah.
You know, is that one of the key considerations?
So is it genuine flexibility? I'm not saying anything's disingenuous here, but is the modifications actually effective in creating genuine flexibility here that allows, for example, us to come forward with a pre-application proposal with a mitigation strategy that can be discussed with ONR, AWE, and then a mitigation can be agreed. Is that what the policy is giving us? And we're not clear that it is.
No. And that's, I suppose, what I was saying about the kind of experience of dealing with proposals in the past. And, you know, I've had one appeal decision was provided and you read it and you can see where, you know, this could potentially lead you each time, I guess. Yeah, tricky one. All right, let's go back down the other end of the table and see if there's anything further that you wish to say.
Sorry, thank you, sir. So in terms of consistency nationally, I would respond to you, sir, that this is the only area where statutory testing conducted under REPIR are demonstrating that the off-site emergency plan is stretched. This is an area of particular attention for ONR in its current form. And I think in terms of, to add to my answer earlier, in terms of assessing the adequacy of the off-site emergency plan, obviously the tools for that are in the REPIR legislation. The framework and how those decisions are made are in REPIR and are set out in the accompanying approved code of practice and guidance and such. And ultimately, we have our the statutory testing done on a 3-yearly cycle by the council, which gives us the best available evidence as to the present health. And that will change, presumably, throughout the life of the local plan. I would also draw to your attention, sir, that you would have already seen it in our submission, National Policy Statement EN6, which calls for a level of care above that, beyond regulatory stringency, where it comes to nuclear licensed sites, and tasks ONR with administering control of population around licensed nuclear sites. So there, I would submit there is already an expectation from government that there is a need for caution beyond, and that requires a precautionary approach. I think this policy is seeking to be transparent around the likely high level of constraint, while still preserving a degree of flexibility. That means where a case-by-case argument can be made, where this adequate assurance can be provided to ONR, we will not advise against. And from my organisation's perspective, we feel that that is preferable to a moratorium, because it still enables development to occur in the area where suitable safety demonstration is made. I appreciate it is a regime that is largely alien to the planning system. It is not commonly incorporated, but I would also suggest it is not dissimilar, for example, from COMA, where technical calculations beyond the reach of developers take place, and an answer is provided by the Health and Safety Executive. Just also picking up on the consequence report made. The consequences report is a document produced under the REPIR legislation, which gives you an indication of what the DPZ needs to be. It also includes another zone known as the outline planning zone. The outline planning zone in this case has been set by the Ministry of Defence, but it is we believe it is only possible to assess adequacy against a detailed emergency plan, which is the DPZ. Outline planning is too high level to make any kind of assessment, so we don't propose to exercise any consultation on the basis of the outline planning zone, which is why that doesn't feature in these proposals. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. AWA, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, can I just pick a few other points up as well? I think one of the questions raised by Provision was what about sort of employment developments and clarity on that? And again, you saw that table in the original version of the policy. Again, that does show those different areas in terms of, you know, employment and everything else. So that is providing the clarity in terms of what are the considerations, and then it's different zones, how much population is it? And again, it's employment and everything else. And again, that will be updated, I understand, by ONR on their website. So that will be a link to it, and it will be sort of linked and plugged into the plan when you're looking at it as a sort of a third party, if you like, in terms of, you know, these are the things I take into account in terms of employment population or as a resident or anything else. So I think that's clear. Just going back to your original question, sir, about how did the original plan work, if you like? And again, you recall the original sort of, I think the core strategy, or predecessor, the core strategy wanted a very clear sort of what is likely to happen if I want to put a plan application for certain types of development. And that's really, really important. So again, that's why we're all here, because we want that clarity. That hasn't, what's started to happen is that's becoming woolly. People are making these arguments on a case-by-case basis, on the wrong basis as well, by saying, look, the risk is really low about actually being in this area, so you don't need to worry. Mitigation can take place on its own basis, so don't need to worry. That's completely the wrong basis of this thing, isn't it? It really needs to have this very clear policy about the risks of the off-site emergency plan. So that it has that clarity there, and that's why it needs to have that, if you like. Sorry, last point is, probably just worth a final tidy up and check on the policy in terms of the consistency between the policy and the supporting text. I take that point in terms of they're not quite expressed in the same way, but you know, that can be checked. I don't think that changes much. So.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you for that. So just thinking back to the difference now, the further clarity that you say is provided, it's because of the way the test expressed in terms of the unacceptable risk to the operation of the off-site emergency plan.
Yes, that's correct.
And so that would rule out things like arguments about, well, the risk of some accident here is really low, and they've got to address that every time. That just takes that out of the
that keeps coming up consistently.
Yeah,
it's kind of going down the wrong track completely.
Yeah, yeah, understood. And the other level of clarity, I suppose, it provides is, I think this is going back to what you were saying, and sort of the comparison with COMAR and HSE advice, that that's why it says if you advise against it, it will normally be refused, because that level of expertise, it can only be provided by your statutory role.
I would agree. So I think one of the difficulties here is this is obviously a very technical matter, which draws on a range of evidence that may not be readily available to others. I know the council within their own arrangements often makes use of the AWE offsite planning group, which draws. It is important to remember, I think, which can sometimes be lost. The offsite emergency plan is a multi-agency plan. And this particular plan involves something around 25 different agencies, both local and national, and each of them has some given expertise to make that plan work. It is necessarily difficult to compile all of that expertise and all that judgment into a single list. And the council, I know in their own arrangements, does frequently make use of the AWE offsite planning group to draw in that specific technical expertise to determine whether an application can be accommodated. And we obviously make use of that within our own judgments.
So in your experience of having dealt with proposals in the context of the core strategy policy for 10 years or so, and the legislation things have moved on a bit, but I mean, essentially, you think, or you're satisfied that this provides further clarity because it's more precise in terms of setting what the tests are. Is that right?
I think it provides further clarity in terms of consultation. I think it provides useful clarity in the nature that the zones may change as a result of legislative change or operations on site, which I think was less clear in the previous policy. I think it also provides the supporting text and the need for pre-application provides a way that some technical information can be made available readily to developers so they can have an indication of what the outcome will be. But I think it also indicates that this is just a difficult area. this is an area subject to a high level constraint at the present time because of the evidence that is emerging from our statutory testing of this offsite emergency plan.
And you're satisfied that the way the policy, the tone of the policy, it gets across that the importance of that constraint.
I would hope it would get across the importance of that constraint without being alarmist. Obviously, the offsite emergency plan in its present state is adequate for the existing population, disposition of the population and burden placed on responders. I think what I would hope it would signify is that care needs to be taken with proposals in this area.
Okay, thank you. Provision and then Mr. Pike.
So could we just clarify, is there scope within this policy for an applicant to work with the council through pre-application consultation to come up with mitigation to improve or adapt the offsite emergency plan to allow development to come forward?
Well, you tell me.
I think the honest answer is I don't know. Is we're constantly trying to improve the plan. We're under intervention at the moment to try and see what we can do to improve. It's constantly happening. Every 3 years we're going through this process for either of the plans. There's always things that change, legislative changes. It's always changing. But I think at the end of the day, there are capacity issues and more people going into an area of where there's a risk, a known risk is not necessarily palatable, particularly if you're looking at, it's been mentioned about the consequence reports, that we're talking about within 20 or 25 minutes, depending on which site 25 or 15 minutes, depending on which site you're actually referring to, is the time that we need to get people undercover to afford them the greatest of protection. So it's not like some of the other nuclear license sites when they've actually got sometimes time if a reactor is going wrong to actually do something. We will not be afforded that luxury. So it's a really challenging time in a challenging area to actually be able to respond effectively. So it's we're always looking to do that. Believe me, we are. We're not saying no for no reason. We've got a lot of concerns about it, but we are trying to improve it all the time to see what we can do. But then the regulators will decide whether it's adequate or not.
So if I may just follow on to that. So it sounds like in principle, there is, in principle at least, the opportunity to come up with a mitigation strategy that would be agreed with you, that would satisfy the regulators to allow something to come forward. It might be, I don't know, providing on-site accommodation within a facility where within 2 minutes, whatever it might be, I don't want to get into details of that. But in principle, is there the opportunity for mitigation?
I would caution that, because if there's opportunities for mitigation, it would have to be outside the DEPZ. And if there's an opportunity to do something outside the DEPZ, then I would suggest that's where you build your houses or whatever it is, not putting more into the DEPZ. So I think I would caution on that approach.
Obviously, but there is development established businesses already in the DPZ who've got a future. They've got to look at a future. You know, they can't just have a mothball situation. They need to know how they can adapt in the future, particularly in a climate of economic shortfall of needing to deliver logistics and what have you. So this is why I think it's really, really crucial to get the detail and to get the structure of this policy right. It has massive implications, maybe for a very focused area, massive implications.
Thank you. Mr. Pike.
Thank you. As someone following this issue from cold, I was somewhat confused because what is referred to in the policy as the OCZ appears to be described on at least the paper version of the policies map as OPZ. So I think that's probably an editorial issue. And if it's different, then it's not referred to. Unfortunately, I can't look at the online version of the policies map. I think it's a firewall issue.
No, that's fine. I think there was, as part of the response, there was proposals to amend the policies map because there is some issues around the zones and the legends on them.
Okay, thank you. Residents Association.
Yes, one final point. I appreciate that, developers want to develop and they want to build houses with, properties within the DEPZ. But, I'm coming from a perspective of public safety. And also in the knowledge of the significant investment into both AWE sites. They're here to stay for a long time. I'm not expecting the DEPZs to be reduced significantly. At this stage, noting the fragility of the off-site emergency plan and the oversight afforded on West Berkshire Council by the ONR at this stage, I really believe that we need to consider maybe introducing into the policy some form of moratorium, linking it with the OSCP to until such a point where the ONR, step back from their hand-holding or being alongside the West Berkshire Council. So therefore, there is a moratorium on development until the public are satisfied, until it can be demonstrated to those citizens living within the DEPZs that their safety is afforded and that they will be given the correct shelter within the time frame required should there be an incident taking place within the area. Also, we are in the lower Kennet Valley and we have significant flooding. So we have climate change and the AWEs, especially for Burfield. Aldermaston is on the plateau high, but we have a river that runs through AWE Burfield. If you look on the maps, there's old streams. So we need to be very conscious of all of this. So public safety is very important.
Yeah, okay. AWE, can you put the mic on? Yeah.
Just one very quick point, and it was picked up by the council, just in terms of this idea of mitigation. Again, this is part of the reason why we need a very clear policy, because developers come and say, actually, yes, we can have a sort of some form of section 106 that to address it, don't worry. But it goes back to that core principle, can the off-site emergency plan cope? That's very much a large scale strategic thing that needs to be dealt with at that scale. It's not on a site-by-site basis. So that's why it's important to get that policy. It all comes down to that core thing rather than we can do it on that basis. But fundamentally, it could change, as the council have said. The off-site emergency plan could change during the. It could cope with more. We don't know that at the moment. It's the uncertainty. So the policy has that balance in there. I think that's the important point.
So when you say the off-site emergency plan could change, so it could change to a position whereby, well, suddenly, in that particular instance, some more people in some area, it could potentially be.
It could do. We know it's under stress, but I think we're not. I think the whole way it's formulated is to recognise that things can change. Again, it doesn't look like it at the moment, but it can do. So.
Yeah, I know.
It's perhaps to echo that point, sir, that the part of the balance of this policy, as I understand it, is at least a decade policy, and REP here at least changes on a 3-yearly cycle as the process of review and revision. And we don't, if the situation changes, we wish for the policy to be designed such to accommodate that. I think the only thing the idea of mitigation, if the council can give us adequate assurance that a development can be accommodated, and we are satisfied that makes a logical case, we will not advise against it. I think it is worth emphasising that there are situations where there simply is no mitigation that can be, no realistic mitigation that can be offered that would make it acceptable to us. And it is particularly, and this is not to say that in other instances it's not essential, but particularly with development in existing conurbations in the area, it is very, very difficult to offer any mitigation that would satisfy us. We will still consider it, but I think the policy in its present state is designed to capture this high level of constraint that presently exists.
Okay, thank you. Anything further? Yep, provision.
Thank you, sir. Just very one point to reiterate. I think you would probably quote it from the matter 3 discussion, but there's the appeal regarding the site of Burfield Common, the Hollies appeal, which is looking at these issues in quite a lot of detail. And information is coming through that the appeal is being reheard. Now, it was judicially challenged. It's come back for redetermination. There is more information coming out of that on a week-by-week basis as they go through that appeal. I know it's late, but it is very pertinent to the whole issue. So just to remind you, there is that live sort of testing of all of these issues on that particular residential allocation that is, as stands, wouldn't be taken forward in the plan. So just to make you aware that pertinent information is coming through that source, through the planning inspectorate, which would be relevant to this discussion.
In what way would that be relevant to the framing of this policy, in the sense that that appeal is being assessed in, well, I suppose there's some way we get into this, but it's assessed in the context of the existing policy?
I believe it's testing the context, and it's looking at things like, can residential population be managed in the DEPZ under the current plan? What are the risks? It's looking at the whole issue.
So sorry, so that's the proposal that was it was allowed on appeal, and then there was a legal challenge, and the decision was
then it was quashed and returned to the inspectorate to redetermine.
To be looked at again.
And that process is now being redetermined.
Right. Okay.
Statements of case are being exchanged, etc., and information is being shared on that, which is potentially very pertinent to this matter.
AWA.
I think you've touched on it, sir. That was mainly considered against the current development plan. It will be considered again, what weight is given to that will be a kind of consideration at that point. But again, that was a test at that time. Again, we have got other appeal decisions which have sort of come very clearly on this sort of, again, taking this off-site emergency plan position as well. So on the Shyshack Claim one, I think exam 4 is in your documentation as well. So I think we have to be slightly careful about waiting for other decisions. Other inspectors, your colleagues have sort of reached sort of the view on it as well. So I think you've got the evidence in front of you for this examination. Nothing's really saying you shouldn't be following the approach in this local plan as it's drafted at the moment. I don't think you can just wait to sort of see what might happen.
No.
Different considerations, different policy tests as well. So
I suppose that comes down to what I'm trying to understand is your views as people who've had to operate a policy that's been around for 12 years or whatever, in terms of the extent to which this now provides further clarity. I think what you're saying to me is it does. It's a better policy than the core strategy one, and it should avoid some of the arguments that have arisen because of the way the core strategy policy was written before, in terms of the sort of things that I read in that appeal decision.
correct.
That's what you're telling me in terms of the clarity, I think.
Very much so, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. That was helpful again. I don't think I've got any further questions. Has anybody else? No. Okay, anything else from the council wish to say? Okay. No. Right, thank you. That was helpful. So that brings me on to the next item, which is the an additional policy in the plan that was drafted in response to my AP 13, which is about two MOD facilities, Denison Barracks and RAF Welford. So this was drafted in collaboration with the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, and it's been agreed with them, I assume. They're not here to say they disagree with it.
It has, yes.
Okay. And there's no, I mean, yes, it seems to make sense to me. There's no, it does a particular thing. It's another category of development that would be in the countryside that deals with a specific sites in the same we've talked about, the race sourcing industry and educational institutes and things like that. So this does a particular job for these particular sites. I don't think anybody's got any comments they wish to make. No. Okay. Thank you. Fine. So is there anything else that we need to pick up on today that we haven't already covered? If not, thank you again for that, the contributions today. We're back the week after next on the, I don't remember which day it is now. The Wednesday, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Okay. Thank you.